And a reminder, you can purchase Marie and Téa's books from our bookstore online at the event page that brought you here. I will also send links in the chat as well, so you can directly purchase. And if you're watching our recording on YouTube, you can buy the books with the links in the descriptions. I get to do the thing that YouTubers do now. The links will be down there as well. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, if you live in Ann Arbor, a reminder that select titles are now available for curbside pickup. And there are details about curbside pickup for select titles on our website. Not all titles that we can fulfill orders for are necessarily eligible for curbside as we get our stock back up to date. Been not a physical bookstore for 2 months, but more and more titles are becoming available for curbside. In lieu of book purchase, you can also consider a $5 donation to sustain our virtual programming. There is a little button on our website that says donate. You can think of that, there's also a link on the event page as well. You can think of that $5 donation as a fee for the event, a weekly subscription, a monthly subscription, a subscription for the remainder of our virtual events for the year. Whatever you want to think of it as, it's helpful for us. We're so lucky to be able to continue to bring you these events while we remain closed to the public for events. And otherwise, we simply thank you for joining us and attending tonight. So without further ado, Marie-Helene Bertino is the author of 2 AM at the Cat's Pajamas and the story collection Safe as Houses. She was a 2017 Frank O'Connor International Short Story Fellow in Cork, Ireland. Her work has received the O. Henry Prize, the Pushcart Prize, the Iowa Short Fiction Award, and the Mississippi Review Story Prize. Fellowships from the McDowell, Sewanee, and NYC's the Center for Fiction, and has twice been featured on NPR's Selected Shorts. Téa Obrecht's debut novel, The Tiger's Wife, won the 2011 Orange Prize for Fiction and was an international bestseller. Her work has appeared in the Best American Short Stories, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, Harper's Magazine, and Zoetrope, All Story, among many others. Originally from the former Yugoslavia, she now lives in New York with her husband and teaches at Hunter College. Please join me in using your reaction clap functions to welcome Marie-Helene and Téa to your living rooms.
Thank you so much, John. I hope you can hear me okay. So I thank you so much for having me. John, that was a lovely introduction. I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you to Literati for inviting us here tonight. It is an honor to be in conversation with my dear friend, brilliant genius, Téa. It's very nice to be in Ann Arbor. Téa?
Oops, I have to unmute Téa. I'm sorry.
You're trying to speak.
I think I've lost her in the shuffle of participants, but here we go. All right, asking to unmute.
Speak, Téa, speak.
Thank goodness. Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so sorry. I muted myself by mistake because I thought I'd be quiet and not make any noises during John's beautiful introduction, and then I couldn't get back on. Hi.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
I was just saying how lovely and what a genius you were.
It's such an honor to be here with you, and it's hard to say how much I loved Parakeet and how excited I am to talk about this book and all your other work. So thank you for having me here.
In addition to Parakeet coming out a few days ago, it was also very recently Téa's novel's paperback launch last week for Inland. So I highly recommend everyone avails themselves of the opportunity to read that beautiful book. And I will be holding that book up a lot over the course of the next 40 minutes. So I think I'm going to read a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
So isn't it nice to be in Ann Arbor? I mean, one amazing thing about these Zoom readings is that we can be in Ann Arbor today and Vermont tomorrow and San Francisco next week. Téa is in Wyoming right now, and I'm in Brooklyn. And it's really one of the most altogether pleasant things about these online readings is that we can all come together from different parts of the country in a way that we normally couldn't. So that's pretty cool. One good thing this week. I'm going to read the first couple pages of Parakeet. It looks like this. And then we get to chat a little bit. The first chapter is called, What is the Internet? 1 week before my wedding day, upon returning to my hotel room with a tube of borrowed toothpaste, I find a small bird waiting inside the area called the antechamber, and know within moments it is my grandmother. I recognize the glittering hematite eyes, the expression of cunning disapproval. The odor of a gym at close of day encircles her. What is the internet? The bird says, does not say. Her head is the color of warning, sharp curve, yield yellow. The eyes on either side of the Cro-Magnon crown are lined the way hers were, in shoddy cornflower pencil, as if to say, really look here. Her hair, that had throughout her life hurled silvery messages skyward, has been replaced by orderly navy stripes that emanate down her pate like ripples in silk. Under the beak where her unpronounced chin would have been, 4 regal feathers pose, each marked by an ebony dot. She hovers inches above the sofa's back, chastened and restless by her new form. The toothpaste lands with a dull thud on the carpet. I'm silent when stunned, no getting me to talk. What is the internet? My grandmother the bird insists, speaking as if we are in the middle of a conversation, which, in a way, we are. She had called to ask this question 10 years before. At the time, I considered explaining the technological phenomenon, but she was so old. What would be the point, I reasoned, of telling her about the show priming to begin after her exit? There have been many times in my life when, encountering an opportunity to do good, for reasons of either shyness or shock, an unwillingness to leave a safe perch has made me balk. I told my grandmother the internet was solely for engineers and that its effect on society would be nominal. The following day, she climbed a ladder poised against her house, meaning to hammer a warped shingle. Something like a phone call, we were never certain, summoned her. She misremembered the ladder and fell from the roof. For a month, we attempted to will her out of a coma with the music of Lawrence Welk. She preferred to stay asleep. After she was gone, every room was a nothing room. I don't regret letting others rush forward to care for strangers in need. I don't regret calling my brother a little shit on his wedding day. However, lying to my grandmother about the internet placed a painful pebble at the bottom of my stomach that would not go away. Now, my second chance claws the rim of a water glass in present, internet-rich day, as alive as the rest of us, trying to sip through her beak and failing. It turned out to be more influential than I led you to believe, I say. No shit, she says. Tasked with explaining it, I realize how little I know about the internet. It began as numbers on a screen. I make a blurping sound to signify dial-up and explain that it grew from a device only a few people had to Wi-Fi, which I think is in the air. I gesture to indicate exploding. Network names showcase a defining feature of the user. Biscotti worshiper, sad oboe girl. Even as a bird, my grandmother's dubiousness is unmistakable, the cocked avian focus doubting me. When she was alive, she preferred staying in her slippers all day and the term, shove it up your ass, to anything. Maybe even to my grandfather, who over time became a scudding, booted shadow in the house's secondary rooms. In the garage, winding a clock. In the spare bedroom, repairing an outlet. Shove the clock, shove the outlet. If my grandmother ever regretted slicing into another's feelings like fondant, she never admitted it. Any room containing her was merry. And this was a big deal for me, since most of my childhood felt panicked and serious. She'd listen and move her eyebrows in a way that corrected my perspective. With a gaze, she could lift me older. I've come a week early to this inn on the shaft of Long Island to prepare for the transition from woman to wife, to do what the groom calls decompress, because of late, I've become a bit of a nightmare. To break apart if necessary, but to do so properly, amid sledded pool chairs and conference coffee. I'm 36, ethnically ambiguous, and hold an intense job I do not like, biographer of people with traumatic brain injury. I present their lives in court using storyboards and dioramas. Everyone is thrilled I'm getting married. No one can believe I found such a sweet man. Everyone adores the treats sold in this town that are hybrids of bagels and flatbread. Flagels. There are fleets of staircases and elevators and floors large enough to simultaneously host several cathartic events in this inn. In another banquet hall, another wedding will run alongside ours. The plural of catharsis is catharsis. The turnover is quick. Already a lobby poster welcomes attendees of the following week's conference that seems to be about technology and clouds. The inn is buckled to a famous lake that features prominently on the town signage. None of my people are from this area, so the lake is not famous to us. It is akin to pointing to an actor and saying, "That's so-and-so," from a show we've never watched. A gazebo sits in an exultation of cattails, a ruffle of trash by the edge of one of the lake's many inlets. I prefer the ocean because it is ugly and secretive and moody and can growl. Mind you, I'm awful and rarely satisfied. I'm not sure if you're aware what day you've landed on. I speak to the bird in the graded voice you employ for a guest who's arrived too early. It's Sunday. I'm getting married in 6 days. I gesture to the migration of folded cards that cover the carpet in ecru V's, anointed with all I can recall from high school calligraphy. Have you come to wish me well? I say, but knowing her, my tone contains no hope. Of course I know you're getting married. The edges of her projection spit and haul. Do you think I'm here to ask about wires in a box? She goes transparent, and her skeleton shows blinding bright. Then, whatever debatably divine force is conjuring her regains composure, and she is opaque again. There's something I want you to do. Of course, I already know. Knew before she asked about the internet. Knew before rounding the corner to the antechamber and finding a judgmental budgie. Perhaps even before, when I, balancing my room key, wallet, phone, and toothpaste, reached the door and realized I had no way of opening it, and had to place each item on the ground, turn the knob, collect them again. All the while, a turbulence spreading beneath my breastplate, which contained the maddening carbonation that could signal only one person. Thank you for your clapping emojis. I see them and I feel them.
My reaction emoji to, how do you, oh, I don't even know how to do it.
Bottom right, it says reactions.
There we go.
Thank you, Téa. Thank you, Téa. The cycle is complete.
That was a wonderful reading. And that opening, I think, has swiftly become maybe one of my favorite openings in literature, certainly in contemporary literature. And I think it's so...
You stop right now.
No. This is what you agreed to. This is what you agreed to subject yourself to when you asked if I would do this. I'm such a huge... I was a huge admirer of your work before we met, actually, and it's such a pleasure to get to have gotten to see you in the process of writing a book and to be here talking about Parakeet now. It's a book about grief, love, a certain kind of matriarchal womanhood, about sort of rising to, moving through the mire of all of these things, positive and negative, to become the person that one is meant to become. And I wanted to start out by asking you a super boring question, but one that I always find fascinating, which is, what was the germ of this idea? And what's the gap between that germ and what ended up on the page?
The germ of the idea happened right after my previous novel came out, Cat's Pajamas, and I was kind of watching it move through the world. And, you know, you don't know until you know, but that process is really tough in a lot of unexpected ways. You don't realize that there are like lists that you can be on and people who will say things to you about your book. And some of them, you know, are not nice. Actually, to be honest, oh God, knock on wood, everyone was actually quite nice to me, and it was a lovely experience. But I was told by friends, I was talking to a few other debut authors from that year, my cohort, and we all decided that it would be so much easier to go through the process if we were already working on another project. And the lucky ones were already working on another project. And so I normally don't use writing prompts, but because I was having trouble getting started with anything, I used one that I think that I borrowed from nonfiction writers. Like, if you were to write about the hardest thing you could think of in the most honest way, what would you write right now at this moment? What would be the most honest thing you could say about it if you were to say it? And so I decided to write about the ambivalencies I feel about being a bride, about the institution of marriage, about being an unconventional woman in the world, about female friendship, about what it means to be a good sibling. And that was the germ. The distance between that germ and then this book is actually not as great as it could be.
Yeah.
What was different, what was unexpected and beautifully unexpected, was how the sibling relationship took over. I didn't quite anticipate that. I knew it wouldn't be about a wedding. Like, I knew it was about the wedding, but that was very much the backdrop that was kind of exerting all the pressure on the situation. But I knew it wouldn't be about romantic love in that way, like between the bride and the groom. I do think it ended up being about a certain kind of romantic love, but more as like the ideal. And so the sibling relationship took over, and then I was kind of off to the races.
That's amazing. That's wonderful. I love hearing that. Not jumping off of that. I'm curious, when people talk about, when reviewers discuss your work, and in the event that I attended previously this week, the words magical realism often come up. So does the word surrealism, which I think is wonderful to use in the context of literature. I'm curious to know, before I ask you about how you developed your style, I want to ask you about what kind of reader you were as a kid.
Ooh, yay! Oh, I was such a voracious reader. I have no vision at all because I was constantly reading. I mean, it was like my mom, who is on who is attending this reading right now, can attest. It was like, I won't go anywhere unless I can bring my book. Well, you have to come to Erin. I was raised by a single mom, so I had to go with her everywhere. And it was like, well, I won't go unless I can stay in the car and read. Fine, you can stay in the car and read. Solely fantasy and science fiction. Almost solely. The Prydain Chronicles.
Oh.
Black Cauldron.
Yes. Yeah.
I think they are so ingrained in me. They're like in my DNA. Like, I have muscle memory for those books. A joy of being an adult, and you didn't ask this, but one of the joys of being an adult now is I can now buy those books for the children of my friends, and hopefully launch that kind of imagination in them. But definitely like wizards, fairies, sorceresses, secret royalty. I mean, maybe you can empathize, but I was just waiting for a sort of like a magic something to come through my window and reveal to me that I was secretly royal. That was a big deal because I grew up in Northeast Philadelphia. it has its charms, but it wasn't the most magical place. And I think that those books got in somehow. And I was like, there's a place called Vermont with like meadows and mountains. Like that was just as magical to me. Did you read fantasy and fiction, fantasy and sci-fi growing up?
I did, yeah. I also read the Prydain Chronicles and the Chronicles of Narnia as well. Were a big part of my childhood. I read a lot of sort of. I don't think he made it over here because I grew up internationally and went to the British school system in Cairo, and a huge writer there was a man called Dick King-Smith. Who wrote sort of farm animal books about, actually he wrote Babe, I think. Like his most famous book is Babe. Now I didn't read that one, so I hope I'm not mistaking this, but he used to always write about like little runty pigs and who would rise to the occasion. He wrote this one book called Daggy Dogfoot, which was about a dog-footed piglet who's the runt of the litter, and he learns how to swim, and like that's his superpower, which I think is sort of not unlike your waiting to be told that you're royalty, right? That all these books I think had that sort of call to heroism that comes from some secret place, which is wonderful. Love that. I love knowing that about you. I don't think we've ever spoken about the Chronicles of Prydain before, which is shocking because I don't know that many people actually who grew up reading it.
And the ones who I do know who grew up reading it are very special people indeed. And that's why maybe we didn't know that about each other, but that is definitely part of why we hit it off immediately when we did. Taran Wanderer, the second book in that series, I'm working on a novel for the future that is not based on it, but follows the same structure except with a woman. I mean, it just set off so many things for me. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. This explains so much about us.
Actually, to read those books.
It's true. It's true. Maybe some of the folks on this attending this event will. I have a question now. I will ask you about surrealism and magical realism.
Yes.
Particularly when it comes to we were talking earlier about the wedding and the marriage and this acting as a kind of clock, as something that puts pressure on the narrative, and as a result it's this sort of limitation device, right? And I'm somebody who adores limitation devices because I find that they're very, very constructive in forcing other aspects of the imagination to thrive, right? Your work, I find, ranks among very, very few people I know where the events of the narrative feel utterly unpredictable. and so the events feel utterly unpredictable, but also the possibility of the surrealism, the way that surrealism or magic or the absurd or the sublime or the supernatural enters the narrative is unpredictable. And therefore it feels when you're reading it as though there are no limitations, like there's not a kind of bubble in which I as a reader experience your world. There's no backstop to the things that I think could happen. How do you write without limitations? What are the challenges of writing without limitations? Or do you place sort of invisible guardrails on yourself and force yourself, hem yourself in ways we can't see?
What a brilliant question. I don't put any guardrails. I can answer that pretty quickly. I don't put any guardrails on it. And now that I'm trying to think about it, I think that Parakeet contains some of my most unexpected plot points.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think now how I thought of them. And I do tend to think, okay, in this moment, what is the most unexpected thing that could happen? And I also sometimes think outside of the project of a beautiful image or a beautiful scene or a beautiful conversation that someone could have, something I would like to see in a book. Something that comes to mind immediately is just a good parent. Like seeing a conversation between a father and a child, or a mother and a child, where I feel like good parenting is happening. That's something I would think about and think, God, I don't read that very often. I would like to read that. Sure, and so I could start from that, with that as the germ, and sink it into an already ongoing project, or start a new project with that idea. And there's something that happens at the end of the chapter called The Ship that I think is one of the most, like, even I was like, what on earth? Like, this is bananas. And yet, after it was all said and done, and I was toward the end of the revision project, revision part of it, I was like, of course that happens to her in that moment. She has a family history of that. But it was like my subconscious mind is always working on these pieces for me. And it's almost like I write them, and then later I realized the connective tissue was there, which is why we have to exercise, do things that keep our intuition connected.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing to articulate. How do you make sure you're still plugged into your intuition? For me, and I know this isn't true for everyone, for me, it does involve no guardrails. I'm not the kind of writer who does better when it's like, only write something that's 365 words, for instance. But then my friend Helen Phillips wrote a book called And Yet They Were Happy, with that particular writing prompt for each page. And she found wonderful ways of being creative with that constraint. Are you more of a constraint person? I feel like maybe you are.
I am. I think I'm always hoping not to be, or trying to find a way not to be, which is why I'm in such awe of you. And I feared you might say that you wrote unconstrained. I think secretly I was hoping that you'd be like, no, of course. Like, I write these things on Post-it notes, and then I don't let myself go outside of those parameters. I'm kidding.
Is that what you do?
Sort of. I think I have to know. I think I have to know where something is going in order to be able to write. I have to be writing towards something. And with Inland, for instance, because it was based on true history, there were built-in restraints, which was so wonderful, because I could just be like, well, that's not how it really happened, and then like revert to the, sort of fall back on the comfort zone of trying to predict what should happen and maneuver those surprises. Because I do think that thing you're saying about the ship and the end of the surprise. No spoilers. I think those kinds of moments, if you can be working within a particular kind of energy, your own work will surprise you. You said it was a surprise even to yourself, and then afterwards you were able to see. And I think the hope is that even when you write constrained, you can conjure those moments. But I think you're swimming upstream when you place certain kinds of constraints on yourself for being able to conjure surprise. Sorry, go ahead.
But it also sounds like it might be a comfort too, because at least you kind of have that net to fall, or that kind of like you have little buoys that you're floating by. You're like, okay, I hit that one, that's good. I just have to make sure I get to the next one. I can do anything in between. Like I get like Tiger's Wife, which is like the book I give to literally everyone, no matter what kind of reader they are, even if they're not a reader. That book works for literally everyone. Like that's the one I press into people's hands. For Tiger's Wife, did you outline that? Did you know what was going to happen?
I didn't know what was going to happen. But I knew the emotional condition of the participants. The books are total opposites. So yeah, I didn't know what was going to happen, and I wrote sort of into the distance. I knew some notions, and as soon as I kind of knew the broader outline of it, I did outline, and then didn't end up where I thought I would, which is good. Okay. But yeah, I think that one was a lot looser because I was a younger writer and sort of felt like I felt comfortable not knowing what was supposed to happen.
Well, whatever you're doing is working, so I wouldn't feel too bad about the outlines, no outlines, whatever. I mean, the next book I write might be outlines. Who knows?
Yeah.
You know, I feel like you should try anything because it all can yield fruitful things. I find myself following the character a lot and the character's desires, and many of my characters are very unconventional women living on the outskirts of society's desire. And if I just follow them, I find I can, and their desire and the silly scrapes they get into, I can normally find something interesting. But that said, you know, when I get myself into a creative scrape, you know, I drive up to it and then I'm like, whoop, that's not working. And then I slowly back away, delete, try something new. Sure.
It's a good way to be able to maneuver. I want to talk about your unconventional women and how funny and acerbic they are. Your humor is something that is often brought up in conversations about your work. You know, it was difficult, even just the passage that you read, it was difficult not to sort of laugh side-splittingly on camera while listening to it. How do you find your humor, the voice of your humor on the page? Do you find that it's your own voice? Is it a voice that surprises you? Is it style? Does it come from within the characters themselves? I mean, it does, but I guess what's the relationship between character humor and your own sense of humor? Do you write to make yourself laugh?
I do sometimes. I do actually. I confess, I do.
Good.
If I laugh at it, because I don't show any emotion when I write at all normally. I mean, and when I do, I normally feel like I'm onto something that's real and true and authentic. Because I'm normally thinking so hard. It's like I don't have space to have an emotion. But as far as humor goes, I was just listening to writers talk about this last night at another Zoom event. It's not something I try for.
Okay.
In fact, I find it happens, not incidentally, I can't think of the word, but I'm normally not going for the joke. In the moments when I have gone for the joke, it hasn't worked.
Great. Yep.
And also in some of those moments that do make me laugh, those were moments that I eventually had to take out because they kind of sat outside of the narrative. As far as humor goes, and to be honest, I don't know that I would consider my work humorous unless it had been pointed out to me as often as it has, because many times I'm writing what I think is the saddest thing in the world, and then I read it and people are laughing, and I think, I guess that's just my worldview just happens to be very strange to people and funny to people as well. But I do think it comes from, you know, my family is very funny. I'm the least funny member of my family. I'm the least funny member of my friend groups normally. But I love humor so much that I have studied stand-up comedians. I have whole sets of John Mulaney, Mitch Hedberg, whole sets memorized. I have whole episodes of Saturday Night Live from when I was a kid memorized. And there's something about that timing that probably just got in there somehow.
Yeah.
But I think it's something that you definitely have to trim, because you never want to be accused of sacrificing character to make a joke. And you also never want to be, or I never want to be, someone who condescends to my character or reader.
Yeah.
And so there definitely have been moments where I'm like, I think that's funny, but I think that's a bit too condescending, you know? I studied with Michael Cunningham in my MFA at Brooklyn College, and he said, you know, you have to know when you're trying to get away with something. And he said that he was like, he's a very, very, clever writer. And he said he had a trusted friend who knew when he was trying to get away with something. And she said to him, rate all of your clever, like, one-liners in your work, 1, 2, or 3. Like, 1 is really, really, really clever, height of cleverness, funny, 2, and then 3. And she said, and then take all the 1s out.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, and he said that was a very necessary note to get in my career.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How do you edit? Like, what's the principal pillar of your editing process? Do you take out your ones, whether for humor or cleverness? You shouldn't.
I like to say I do, but sometimes I just leave them in because sometimes I leave things in just because it's like a moment of beauty.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't advance anything at all, but it's just like a spark of joy. Once in a while I'll allow myself that. But my editing process is like a series of guiding questions. Have I implicated the character? Does the character have desire? Is the desire big enough? Can the desire be bigger? Where is the trouble coming from? Is there a clock? Can the clock be bigger? Can the clock go faster?
It's a real Alice in Wonderland kind of situation. Just the clock spinning around and around and just looming in. No, I love it. I love it.
Could someone be holding a clock? Are there rabbits? Does the rabbit have a clock?
Can the rabbit fit down the rabbit hole with the clock? Yes. Goodness.
What kind of clock is it? Yeah, and then I think I've said this before, but another mentor, Josh Hankton, also at Brooklyn College, taught us a story should always answer the Passover question, which is, why is this night different from all other nights? And I notice with my students' work, if a story is feeling a little flat on the narrative, on the plot level, it's normally because that Passover question hasn't been answered. So yeah, I just ask myself these questions over and over again. I put it on the shelf at least twice during the process. I read it out loud at least twice during the process. And then hopefully somewhere toward the end, it feels finished.
That's wonderful. I love that. I love the phrasing of the Passover question too. But yeah. I have one more question for you before I think John's gonna come in and turn the questions over to the audience. Though I have plenty more if people in the audience are feeling shy. This is a question I ask myself often, and I always ask at when I have the opportunity to interview another writer. I think we are often surprised to find ourselves drifting back to certain themes and questions and preoccupations in our work. Even when we don't realize that we're doing it, you know, as you were saying, you turn around and you look at the book afterwards and you're like, oh, I did this again, or here's my sort of, I'm continuing to dredge this pond and still finding stuff. What is your perpetually dredged pond? What are you always finding in your work or looking for in your work? What are your preoccupations that despite having written 3 books, you're still returning to?
I would say how if this counts, how difficult it is to be a woman who doesn't want what people think that she's supposed to want, and how the pressure to want what society tells you to want manifests in all sorts of ways, big and small. And Parakeet is a book of a lot of microaggressions on that level. So I think that's one. I think animals and creatures who act as surrogate siblings, surrogate parents, surrogate somethings. I keep going back to musicians, trauma, pain, being a portal to something, the supernatural being some kind of portal that shows up at a moment of tremendous catharsis, normally violent catharsis. Mm-hmm. I noticed that portal keeps showing up over and over again. And I'm thinking of the book I'm working on next, and that is certainly there. Aliens, but that holds hands with being an unconventional woman.
Yeah.
Because the feeling of desperately longing for home, searching for something or someone who feels like a home. I feel like that is very much what I'm searching for. Writing sometimes feels like, a safe home, and always has. I've written since I was able to hold a pencil, literally. And I think that longing is always there. Longing for family, longing for home, that kind of thing. One thing that we share, in addition to magic realism and that supernatural aspect, is like that ghosts. Yeah. And like I'm thinking of the Deathless. I don't know if you would consider the Deathless Man a ghost, or what you would consider.
Anyway, I'll go there. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Do you find that you go back to that? Is that one of your ultra dredged ponds?
For sure it is. I think it's definitely sort of this death, the afterlife made manifest in our physical world, and what that means. I think, which actually also, I guess, is a portal. Animals for me too, certainly. And also the quest for home. I love what you're saying about writing itself being a source of home, and that being kind of the center of your being, like the place where you find home. Because I think that as you say that, it feels really resonant, and deeply moving.
If you're someone who's moved around a lot, or if you're someone who has had unstable situations in any way, the idea that a book or something a copybook that you're writing in can be your constant can be a very powerful thing. And it was certainly true for me. No matter where I am in the world now, I can walk into a bookstore and I always feel comfortable. Always. And that's a big deal. That's a big deal for me.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we're lucky this evening to be at Literati Bookstore remotely, comfortable in it together at home. And John, I think you might have some questions for us from the audience.
Yes. I do have questions, and people can feel free to ask more. We'll try to fit as many as we can in for the hour. The first question is, how did your experiences in an MFA program change your trajectory as a writer? What did you learn about yourself?
Well, I'm someone who waited to get an MFA because I wasn't sure if an MFA would teach me anything about being a writer. In fact, I probably would have said, oh, you can't learn how to write. No one can teach you how to write. So when I did decide to get an MFA, it was because it fit into my life. I was working full time, because I could afford it without taking any loans out, because I went to Brooklyn College, which is a city school, and because I wanted community. So those were the only reasons I got an MFA. And then when I was there, it absolutely taught me how to write, like 1,000%. I wasn't someone who was lucky enough to have grown up around writers or writing. There was so much I had to learn. I hadn't read enough contemporary writers. I wasn't reading living writers. So my MFA, the teachers in my MFA, just showed me the whole world. I found George Saunders and Haruki Murakami, Yoko Ogawa, and these living writers that absolutely became lodestars for me to follow. So I learned structure of a short story. I learned all the masters of the short story, and I patterned my content into their structure until I could figure out how to invent all of it myself. So I learned a great deal. If you're considering going to an MFA, I would just say, not to go into debt for an MFA, because it's essentially like getting a degree in fig Newtons and unicorns, and as it should be. I mean, those are important things. However, I don't think an MFA in fiction is worth mortgaging your house. Also, there's so many great programs that fund and that are affordable. So that's the only unsolicited advice. That's my 2 cents, no refunds.
I think that is an incredible and really, really important advice, and I will second it from my experience at the MFA too. Absolutely. Fig Newtons and Unicorns, I hope to be the title of your essay on getting an MFA.
I do not think I will be weighing in on a debate anytime soon. I feel like that
you.
If I do, I'm sure that essay will be well received.
There's a question, I guess, for both of you about how you two met.
Okay.
That's a good question. Adam?
I can't see you right now, Téa, so I
Oh,
don't know.
there you are. I see you now. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you see me? Yeah.
Yes, I see you. I met Téa by reading Tiger's Wife first. And I was like, oh my God. Oh my God. I don't tend to really freak out about books. And me freaking out about Tiger's Wife was a big deal. I bought it for my mom. I bought it for everybody. That's how I met her first. Do you remember how it happened IRL?
Yeah, I think we were at a party. I think it might have been at Powerhouse Arena in the old space, which is a bookstore in Brooklyn. I feel like I remember that, and we sort of hid in a corner together, as we would then go on to do many times afterwards, and we're sort of inseparable for the rest of the night. Is this ringing a bell at all?
I recall asking you directions to the ladies' room in a different place at a different time, and that being the first time I actually talked to you, and being, oh my God, I just asked Téa Obreht for directions to the bathroom, and you were so nice. And I was like, oh my God, she was so nice to me, because you really gave me great directions.
I believe, listen, people are terrible at giving directions. If there's one thing that you should learn how to do in life, it's give proper directions, you know? It's just, I'm really pleased that I could do that for you, and that you remembered me for it afterwards when we were hiding in Powerhouse.
When we were hiding in the corner of Powerhouse, I was only emboldened to do that because you had given me such clear, and I could tell that you really cared that I found ladies' room in good health. I think you may have even said that night. Like, it's very important that people give good directions. Yes. I think the answer is we don't remember.
We don't really remember.
I think that's the sign of a true friendship. I think a very close friendship is the origin story is lost at time.
We met about 45 minutes ago in the green room.
Was that the Powerhouse that had the big open, like with the risers? That's where they did their events in Dumbo?
Yes, indeed.
Oh man, there's so many. It's very, I don't know why, it's like very emotional to hear about bookstores that I remember going to when I visited New York. I guess it's because I'm just like hoping they're doing okay. But yeah, that's
closed.
Yeah, that's right.
But
I do remember that.
Pandemic related.
Right.
So we're gonna crush that dream for you right now.
Sorry. I guess I should have. I think I did know that, but all time has been folded into simultaneous time for me now. So.
Oh yes.
There's a question again for both of you, which I think is maybe a good question to end on. We have a few minutes left. I'd love to hear about what writers or specific works you both turn to for guidance or inspiration again and again.
Téa, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll get going. I really when I'm looking to dwell in language, and this is something that I wanted and forgot to ask you about too. When I want to dwell in language, I read Neruda, and I know that it's in translation, so I'm sort of cheating myself of the truth of the matter. But I go back to Neruda, and when I'm the books that I reread constantly are Love in the Time of Cholera and The Master and Margarita, always. But the structure of Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye was eye-opening for me in a way that very few things had been until then. Because I don't know if you read it recently or if you remember, but it has these sort of interludes from the future that create a kind of capsule in which the rest of the story is contained. And I read it quite young and hadn't, perhaps even too young to read it, maybe not, and hadn't seen anything like that before. And so that's always a lodestar, I think, that notion of being able to shake loose from the boundaries of time and narrative consciousness and sort of create this pattern that is wonderful and perhaps illogical in certain ways. Yeah, I don't know.
This is a bit strange. We have all the same influences. The Bluest Eye had a similar effect on me, and I also read it way too young. I was, well, maybe not way too young, but I think I was 12 or 13.
That's young. Yeah.
But I guess that's pretty young for that. Love in the Time of Cholera has one of my favorite paragraphs of all time that I teach sometimes when it's, it's called for. But when he's following her through the courtyard.
Yes.
He's essentially like, how is it possible that not everyone is just losing their minds over this woman? And essentially it's just the woman walking through the courtyard of this busy courtyard, and everything becomes what isn't her as she walks in his point of view.
Yeah.
Blew me away. Cormac McCarthy, surprisingly enough, it is actually someone who I go back to because he's faultless on the line level. And last year, way too late actually, I started reading Shirley Jackson.
Oh,
that is she is the true love.
Yeah.
I read Haunting of Hill House. I always say the title wrong. The first chapter contains a description of a woman driving alone and talks about the sensation of being a woman driving alone that took the back of my head off. It is the best description of that feeling. I just can't, and the movie just came out. Shirley came out today. And I'm so excited to watch it.
Yeah.
And she and Yoko Ogawa, I go back to a lot to her collection, Revenge, also changed a lot of things for me and allowed a lot of other things to fall into place. And I think that I'll be following her influence for a while. And I just read Memory Police that was translated last year. Also incredibly good. She has a disquieting unease in very improbable, uncanny stories, normally about a very unconventional woman. And I don't know how she builds her stories. So I'm very much looking forward to spending years and failing to figure it out.
I'm ashamed to say I've not read her, but I should, because I would clearly love her, as we share entirely the same tastes.
Yep. Yes. She'll be your new best friend.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much. You can find, I think, all the books that I mentioned on our website. They're available for purchase. Some of them might be eligible for curbside if you live in Ann Arbor. Thank you both for a really lovely Friday evening conversation. And please be sure to pick up Parakeet and Inland at literatibookstore.com.
Why don't